The little black girl reached the biker near the abandoned gas pump as someone watched her from a cracked window. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. A young girl, no older than 8 or 9, had been running for what felt like miles. The hot sun beat down on her back, sweat dripped from her brow, and her tiny feet throbbed with pain. She stumbled over the cracked pavement, her body aching, but she couldn't stop. Not now. She had to reach him. She had to find someone who would listen. The abandoned gas station loomed ahead, a place she had passed countless times, but never thought she would find herself at. Not like this. As she neared the faded building, she saw the biker sitting near the pump, his leather jacket catching the sun. His motorcycle was parked beside him, and he was idly wiping down the chrome, unaware of the danger that was creeping closer. She ran toward him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sound of her footfalls echoed in the empty lot, and in the distance, the sound of another engine could be heard, a sound that made her heart race with fear. Her heart pounded as she drew closer to the man. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as she approached, his hand pausing in midair as he set the rag down. "Please, help me," she gasped, her voice shaking. "They're coming for me. They won't leave me alone." The biker didn't move at first, his eyes scanning the lot, unsure of what to make of the young girl standing before him, looking so out of place. But then he saw the panic in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. He knew she wasn't just another lost child. "Who's coming for you, kid?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The girl didn't answer immediately. She just shook her head, tears beginning to streak down her dirty face. She was too scared to say more. All she could do was point toward the woods behind her, where the sound of an engine was growing louder. "They're right behind me," she whispered. The biker stood up, his expression hardening. He could feel the weight of the situation, the threat in her voice. He grabbed his jacket and threw it over his shoulder before heading towards his bike. "Get on," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We're getting out of here." The girl hesitated for a moment, then climbed onto the back of the bike, clutching the man's waist with a firm grip. As they sped away from the gas station, the biker glanced over his shoulder. In the distance, a dark figure watched them from the cracked window of the gas station's office. The figure didn't move, but it didn't need to. The danger was coming, and it was following them. Taking a sharp left, the biker accelerated, his Harley roaring to life as the girl clung to his back. She buried her face in his leather jacket, the wind whipping her hair as they sped down the deserted highway. The sound of tires screeching against the asphalt filled the air, but it wasn't enough to drown out the pounding of her heart. She didn't dare look back, but the feeling of being hunted never left her. Every mile they covered felt like a step closer to safety, but it was hard to shake the feeling that danger was only a breath away. The biker didn't speak. He didn't need to. His focus was solely on the road ahead, the girl's trembling presence a stark reminder that time was running out. Her cries for help echoed in his mind, and for a split second, he felt a strange sense of urgency. This wasn't just any child. There was something about her, something familiar, something that made him want to protect her at all costs. They sped past miles of open fields, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the road. The girl shivered despite the warmth of the air, her mind racing. She had no idea where they were going. She only knew she had to escape. As the wind in her face subsided, she found herself growing more aware of the motorcycle's vibrations beneath her. She had no idea who this man was, but he was her only hope. "Where are we going?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. The biker didn't look at her, but he could feel the weight of her question. "Somewhere safe," he replied, his voice calm but firm. The girl didn't press further. She wasn't sure she believed him, but it was the only answer she had. And right now it was enough. The landscape shifted as they passed a few scattered houses, small towns that looked peaceful from a distance. But she knew better. There was no peace in her life. Not anymore. The thought of her mother, left behind and alone, tugged at her heart. But the thought of what she had just escaped pushed her forward. She couldn't go back. Not to him. not to the nightmares. The biker's grip tightened on the handlebars, his eyes scanning the road ahead. He knew he had to get them off the main road. The further they went, the more likely it was they would be spotted. His mind raced, calculating their next move. The girl's words kept echoing in his mind. They're coming for me. He didn't know who they were, but he was starting to understand the weight of the situation. His instincts, honed from years of living life on the edge, told him something much darker was unfolding. The girl wasn't just running from anyone. She was running from something serious. And whoever was chasing her wasn't going to stop. A few miles later, the biker took a sharp turn off the highway, his bike skidding slightly on the loose gravel as he veered onto a side road. The girl barely held on as they swerved, the rough terrain a stark contrast to the smooth highway they had just left behind. She gasped, gripping his waist tighter. "Where are we going?" she asked again, her voice cracking with fear. He didn't answer. Instead, he sped up, the motorcycle's engine growling as they plunged deeper into the woods. The trees pressed close on both sides, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers reaching for them. It was silent here, too quiet. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves as the bike cut through the underbrush. The girl's anxiety heightened with every passing second. She wanted to scream, but she was too scared, too tired. She just wanted to be safe. Her eyes darted around, half expecting to see headlights cutting through the trees, but there was nothing. It felt as though they had entered another world, one where the rules didn't apply, and time itself slowed down. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the biker slowed the bike to a stop. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence enveloping them like a thick blanket. The girl's heart still raced in her chest, and she could feel her legs shaking. "Stay here," the biker said, his voice commanding, though gentle. He dismounted the bike and walked toward the edge of the clearing, scanning the area with sharp eyes. The girl watched him, still unsure if she could trust him, but something in the way he moved told her he wasn't going to let her down. She waited, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breathing. The feeling of being watched was stronger here, more oppressive. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, but all she saw were trees and shadows. As she turned back, the biker returned to the bike, his face grim. "We need to move again," he said, his voice low and urgent. The girl nodded, too scared to speak. She climbed back onto the bike, clutching the biker's waist once more. Without another word, he revved the engine, and they were off again, plunging deeper into the darkness. The trees began to thin as the biker and the girl raced deeper into the woods, the sound of the Harley's engine reverberating through the silence. The darkness seemed to close in around them, but the biker knew the road well. He had spent years navigating backwoods like these, and in that moment, they were his only escape route. The girl clung to his waist, her small body pressed tightly against his as the bike cut through the narrow path. She was silent now, her mind racing, but the fear that had gripped her earlier was still there, lingering like a shadow. She glanced over her shoulder again, half expecting to see headlights pushing through the trees, but nothing came. It was as if the world had fallen away behind them. A part of her wanted to scream, to let out all the terror that had built up inside her, but she couldn't. She was too scared to make a sound. The only thing she could do was hold on. The biker's grip on the handlebars was steady, his focus unbroken as he steered them through the winding path. He knew that every second counted. Every minute they spent on this road was a minute that the people chasing her were getting closer. His mind raced, trying to figure out what the next step would be. He had to get them out of here. But where? He didn't know, but he wasn't about to let this little girl down. As they moved deeper into the forest, the dense trees grew even thicker, their limbs reaching out like dark fingers. The air was heavy with the scent of pine, and the only sounds were the crunching of gravel beneath the tires and the steady rhythm of their breathing. The girl shifted nervously, her small fingers tightening around the biker's jacket. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. But she couldn't help feeling a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. After what felt like an eternity, the biker slowed the bike, pulling it to a stop in a small clearing. He killed the engine, and the world fell silent around them. The girl's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around. The trees stretched high above them, their branches intertwining to block out the sky. It was dark here, darker than anywhere they had been before. It felt like they were hidden away from the world, but she wasn't sure it was enough. The biker stood up and turned to face her. His face was hard, his jaw clenched, but his eyes were softer now, as if he was trying to reassure her without saying a word. "Stay here," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I need to check the area." She nodded, though the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. She watched as the biker moved into the shadows, his silhouette disappearing between the trees. She hugged herself, trying to fight off the cold that seemed to seep into her bones. She didn't know where he was going or when he would be back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The silence felt too heavy. It was as though the entire forest was holding its breath. She could hear every rustle of the leaves, every crack of a twig underfoot, and her heart thudded louder with each passing second. It was in the distance that she saw it. A flicker of movement, a shadow moving quickly between the trees. She froze, her eyes widening. The figure was just outside the clearing, just barely visible through the trees. She tried to steady her breath, but it felt impossible. The figure didn't move closer, but it didn't go away either. It lingered, watching. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it them? Was it the people who had been chasing her? She wanted to run, to scream for the biker to come back, but she couldn't. She was paralyzed, trapped in the moment. Then, a voice called out from behind her. "Hey kid, you good?" She spun around to find the biker standing there, his hand resting on his motorcycle, his expression unreadable. She let out a shaky breath, the tension draining from her shoulders. "I thought I saw someone," she whispered. "I don't know if they're following us." The biker's gaze flicked over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the shadows, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he walked over to her, his presence steady and reassuring. "They're not close yet," he said, his voice low. "But we need to move. We're not safe here." He didn't need to say more. The girl knew. They couldn't stay. She climbed back onto the bike, her grip tightening around the biker's waist. The fear still gnawed at her, but she trusted him now. He was the only one who had kept his promise, the only one who hadn't let her down. The bike roared back to life, the engine cutting through the night air as they sped off once more, deeper into the unknown. The road ahead was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the bike's headlights cutting through the trees. The biker's grip on the handlebars was firm, his eyes scanning the path ahead as the girl clung to his back, her small hands gripping his jacket. The weight of the night hung heavy in the air. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness, every rustle of the trees, every beat of her heart. The girl's mind raced. She had no idea where they were going or how long they would keep riding. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of hope. The biker hadn't said much since they left the clearing, but his presence was steady, reassuring. He hadn't asked questions, and he hadn't judged her. He was just focused on keeping them both safe. She tried to focus on the road ahead, but the weight of everything that had happened to her over the last few days was too much to ignore. Her mother's face flashed in her mind. Her mother, who she had been so desperately trying to protect, now gone. She couldn't even remember the last time she had felt truly safe. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker didn't answer right away. He seemed to be considering her question, his face set in a determined expression. "Somewhere you'll be safe," he said, his voice low but steady. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was enough. The girl nodded, trying to believe him, even though the uncertainty gnawed at her insides. The motorcycle roared as it sped down the winding road, the trees beginning to thin as they neared a small town. It wasn't much, just a few scattered buildings, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. The biker slowed the bike as they approached a small, run-down motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering in the night. He pulled up next to a row of parked cars and killed the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening. The girl slid off the bike, her legs weak from the long ride, and she followed the biker as he led her inside the small office. The man behind the counter didn't even look up when they entered, but the biker didn't need him to. He paid for a room, his movements quick and businesslike. The girl felt a pang of guilt as she watched him pay. She had nothing to offer him in return, nothing but her thanks, and that didn't feel like enough. They walked down a narrow hallway, the dim lights above flickering as they passed room after room. The door to their room creaked as the biker pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The room was small, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a television sitting on a small stand across from it. The smell of stale air and cleaning products lingered, but at that moment, it felt like a haven. The biker set his jacket down on the chair by the door and turned to the girl. "You need to rest," he said. "We'll figure out what to do next in the morning." The girl nodded, but her eyes never left the door. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. She didn't trust that they were safe just yet. The biker must have seen the fear in her eyes because he took a step closer, his voice soft but firm. "You're safe here. They won't find us tonight." The girl didn't say anything, but she wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel safe. But deep down, she knew that the people who were after her wouldn't stop. They wouldn't just give up. The biker turned away to make a call, his voice low as he spoke into the phone. The girl stood by the window, her gaze shifting from the street outside to the darkness beyond. It felt as though the night was closing in on them, and she wondered how much longer she could keep running. She wondered if she would ever be able to go home again. The sound of the biker's voice snapped her back to reality. "We've got some time," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "But we have to move fast. I don't know who's after you, but I won't let them get to you." She wanted to thank him, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded again, the weight of her emotions too heavy to bear. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. And yet, there was something about the biker, something in the way he looked at her, in the way he acted, that made her believe, just for a moment, that she might actually be safe. The thought felt strange, unfamiliar. But as the night stretched on, and the sounds of the outside world seemed to fade away, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this man could keep her safe. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to close her eyes and rest. But as she drifted into a light sleep, the nagging feeling of being watched never quite left her. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the silence in the motel room pressing in on the girl. She sat on the edge of the bed, her legs tucked beneath her, staring at the floor. The events of the past few days replayed in her mind like a broken record, each memory more painful than the last. Her mother, the fear, the chase, the unknown. She couldn't escape it, no matter how hard she tried. The biker was still on the phone, speaking in low tones as he walked around the small room, pacing back and forth. The girl couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the urgency in his voice. It only made her more nervous. She looked out the window again, her eyes scanning the darkness. The small town was quiet, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The people after her were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they found her. The girl hugged her knees to her chest, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She couldn't cry. Not now. Not when they were so close. The biker's voice grew louder as he ended his call, and he turned to face her. His face was grim, the lines around his eyes deepening with concern. He walked over to the small desk and grabbed his jacket, slipping his arms into the sleeves with practiced ease. "We have to move," he said, his voice low but firm. "They're getting closer. I don't know who they are, but they won't stop until they have you." The girl felt her stomach twist into knots at his words. She didn't want to leave, didn't want to keep running. But she knew he was right. She had no choice. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker paused for a moment, his gaze steady as he looked at her. "I know a place. It's far from here, but we need to make it there before they catch up." The girl nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She didn't want to go anywhere, didn't want to keep running, but she knew there was no other option. She had to trust him. The biker grabbed his keys from the table and motioned for her to follow him. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady as she walked to the door. She glanced over her shoulder one last time, the feeling of being watched never quite leaving her. The motel room felt like a distant memory as she stepped into the night once again. The cool air hit her face, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, trying to shake off the chill. The biker was already at the bike, revving the engine as he waited for her. She climbed onto the back once more, the weight of the situation sinking in as she adjusted herself. The bike roared to life, and they sped off into the night, the sound of the engine filling the silence as they left the small town behind. The road was quiet, the only sounds coming from the motorcycle and the rush of wind in their ears. The girl kept her eyes forward, her mind spinning with thoughts of what was to come. The thought of what she was running from, the unknown, the people chasing her, kept her on edge, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. The further they traveled, the more isolated the road became. The trees seemed to grow thicker on either side, their branches reaching out like dark hands. The air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. It felt like they were entering another world, one where they were alone, cut off from everything. The girl's thoughts began to wander, the exhaustion starting to catch up with her. She leaned her head against the biker's back, her eyelids growing heavy. She couldn't remember the last time she had slept, the last time she had felt truly safe. She had been running for so long, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. "We're almost there," the biker said suddenly, his voice cutting through her thoughts. The girl straightened up, her heart skipping a beat. She had no idea where there was, but the fact that they were still moving meant that she hadn't been caught. The bike slowed as they approached a large, gated property. The gate was tall, made of rusted iron, and the driveway was long and winding. The biker didn't slow down, though. He sped past the gate and took a sharp turn onto a gravel path that led to a small cabin. The girl's eyes widened as they approached. It was a secluded place, far from the main roads, surrounded by thick trees. It was exactly what they needed, a place to hide. The biker stopped in front of the cabin and killed the engine, the sound of the bike dying away in the still night. The girl climbed off the bike, her legs shaky as she took in the surroundings. The place looked old, weathered, but it was safe. For now. The biker stood beside her, watching the road. "Stay close," he said. "This is the last place they'll expect us to be." The girl nodded, her heart still racing. She followed him into the cabin, trying to push aside the lingering fear. She didn't know how long they would stay here, or how long they would be safe. But for now, it was the best they had. The cabin was eerily quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the floorboards as the girl shifted on the old wooden chair. She sat by the window, her eyes scanning the dense woods outside. The darkness felt heavier now, more oppressive than before, and the fear that had been pushed aside for a moment crept back into her chest. The biker had been gone for hours, checking the perimeter, making sure no one had followed them. He had left the girl with only the faintest instructions to stay put, but the silence was suffocating. She couldn't help but wonder if they were truly safe, or if this was just another stop along the way. The girl glanced over at the small clock on the wall. It was nearly midnight, and still, the biker hadn't returned. Her thoughts wandered back to the events of the past few days, the fear, the running, the relentless pursuit. Her heart tightened as she thought of her mother, the one person who had always been there to protect her, the one person who was now gone. She swallowed hard, pushing back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. It wasn't the time for tears. She had to be strong, for herself and for the biker, who had risked his life to get her out of that hellish situation. She didn't even know his name, but she trusted him. She had to. The sound of footsteps outside the cabin suddenly broke her thoughts. Her heart leaped into her throat. She stood up quickly, her breath catching in her chest, her eyes fixed on the door. For a moment, there was silence. And then, the door creaked open slowly. The biker entered, his face grim, his eyes scanning the room quickly. He shut the door behind him with a soft thud, and for a moment, the two of them just stood there, neither speaking. "It's quiet out there," the biker said, his voice low. He removed his jacket and hung it on a hook by the door, his posture tense. "But we can't stay here long. We have to keep moving." The girl's heart sank. She had hoped, for a moment, that they could rest, that they could stay here and figure things out. But the look on his face told her that there was no rest. "Not yet." "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaky. The biker sighed and ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. "They're still out there," he said. "I've been keeping an eye on the roads. No sign of them yet, but they'll come for you. I don't know who they are or why they're after you, but we can't wait around to find out." The girl nodded, her mind racing with questions. She wanted to ask more, to know who they were and what kind of people would chase a little girl through the woods like this, but she didn't. She could see it in his eyes. He was just as uncertain as she was. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. The biker's gaze softened for a moment, but only for a moment. He stepped closer to her, his presence steady and reassuring. "We keep moving," he said firmly. "I know a place. A safe house. It's not far from here, but we have to leave soon. They won't stop." The girl swallowed, her stomach twisting. She didn't want to run anymore. She was tired of being afraid, tired of the constant uncertainty. But she knew there was no choice. She had to trust him. She had no one else. The biker grabbed his jacket, and they headed out into the night again. The cold air hit her like a slap in the face, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her as they moved toward the bike. The engine roared to life once more, and they sped down the winding road, the dark woods stretching out on either side of them. The only light came from the headlights of the bike, cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and the occasional flicker of a distant light. The girl pressed her face against the biker's back, trying to push the fear aside. She couldn't think about what was behind them. She couldn't think about who might be chasing them. She had to focus on the road ahead. The biker didn't speak as they drove, his concentration solely on the road. The girl's mind raced with thoughts of what was to come, but she couldn't focus. Every turn, every bump in the road, made her heart race faster. After what felt like hours, they reached the edge of the woods, and the biker slowed the bike. "This is it," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We'll be safe here for now." The girl looked around, but all she saw were abandoned buildings, empty streets, and the dim glow of streetlights. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The biker led her to a small, dilapidated house at the end of the street. The windows were boarded up, and the door creaked as he opened it. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. But at least they were off the road, and for now, that was enough. The door creaked shut behind them as they entered the small house. It was cold, too cold for a place that seemed abandoned. The walls were bare, and the air had the musty smell of disuse. The girl hesitated for a moment at the threshold, her gaze scanning the room. The biker stepped inside, his boots heavy on the floorboards as he moved to the far side of the room. He glanced around, making sure there was no immediate danger. "Stay close," he said, his voice calm but firm. The girl nodded, her feet moving silently behind him. She had no idea where they were, but right now, it didn't matter. The house was their shelter, and they needed to rest, if only for a little while. The biker began to pull down the shades, blocking out the light, and moved to the far corner of the room where a small table and a couple of chairs were set up. He sat down, his eyes still scanning the space around him. The girl lingered near the door, unsure of what to do next. She could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her chest, louder than the quiet that filled the house. Her stomach twisted in knots, her thoughts racing. She didn't know how much longer she could keep running. She didn't know if they were truly safe here. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The biker didn't answer immediately. He was lost in thought, his gaze distant, focused on something far beyond the room they were in. After a long moment, he finally spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "Now we wait. They'll come looking for you, but we'll be ready." The girl swallowed, trying to push down the fear that had begun to rise in her throat. "How long do we wait?" she asked, the uncertainty hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. The biker met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "As long as it takes," he said. He paused before adding, "You'll be safe here for now, but we have to move quickly once we leave. They won't stop until they find you." The girl nodded, trying to understand the weight of his words. She wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know who was after her, why they were after her, and how the biker knew so much, but she kept quiet. She didn't want to be a burden. She had to be strong. The silence between them grew thicker, and the girl found herself staring at the small window at the back of the room. The world outside was dark, quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She turned her eyes back to the biker, who was now pacing back and forth, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was tense, his jaw tight with determination. It was clear that he wasn't going to let anyone harm her. She had never met someone like him, someone who would go so far to protect a stranger. She didn't know his story, didn't know his name, but she knew that she owed him everything, and she was terrified of losing him. "You should get some rest," the biker said, interrupting her thoughts. He turned to look at her, his eyes softer now. "We can't keep going forever. You need to be ready for whatever comes next." The girl hesitated. She didn't want to sleep, didn't want to let her guard down, but she knew he was right. Her body was exhausted, her mind barely able to keep up with the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She nodded slowly and moved toward the old couch in the corner. She sat down, curling up into a small ball. Her thoughts still raced, but the exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. The girl closed her eyes, trying to drown out the noise in her head. She tried to focus on the steady rhythm of her breathing, to calm herself. But sleep wouldn't come. Every sound outside, Every rustle of the trees, every distant noise, made her flinch. She couldn't relax. Not yet. Not until she was sure they were safe. The biker, sensing her unease, stopped pacing and sat down across from her. He was silent for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to worry. I'm not going anywhere." His words were meant to comfort, but they only made her more aware of how much danger they were in. The girl wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him, but she couldn't. She couldn't trust anyone, not anymore. Not after everything that had happened. The minutes stretched into hours, the night deepening around them. She could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, the pressure of what was coming next. And yet, in the back of her mind, there was a small flicker of hope. A tiny spark that told her that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. She closed her eyes again, trying to ignore the fear gnawing at her. This time, sleep found her. But it was restless. She dreamt of shadows and whispers, of being chased down dark streets, of the biker being taken away from her. When she woke up, the room was still dark, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the wind outside. She didn't know what time it was, but the air had shifted. Something was different. The danger felt closer now. She could feel it in her bones. The girl woke up to the sound of the wind howling outside, its eerie whistle seeping through the cracks in the walls. The room was still dark, the faintest hint of dawn just starting to color the edges of the sky. She stretched, her muscles stiff from the awkward sleep on the old couch. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then, it all came rushing back. The biker, the danger, the endless chase. She sat up, her eyes scanning the small, dimly lit room. The biker was nowhere to be seen. The silence felt heavy, suffocating. Her heart began to race, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed to think. She glanced toward the window, her gaze lingering on the shadows outside. The woods were still, no movement in sight, but she could feel the tension building. She had been running for so long, and each new place they stopped felt like it could be their last. She stood up slowly, trying to shake off the lingering exhaustion. Her body ached, but she couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. The door to the room creaked open, and the biker stepped inside, his expression unreadable. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, but there was something in them, a flicker of concern, maybe, before he turned and shut the door behind him. "It's time," he said, his voice steady but tinged with an urgency she couldn't ignore. "We have to leave now." The girl's stomach twisted. She knew they couldn't stay here forever, but she had hoped for more time, just a little more time to gather her thoughts, to breathe. "Are they coming?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker nodded grimly, his jaw tight. "They're closer than I thought. We need to move fast. We can't outrun them forever, but we can stay one step ahead." She didn't argue. She knew he was right. She didn't know who they were, but it didn't matter. They were coming for her, and as much as she wished she could hide away, she couldn't. She had to keep moving. She grabbed her jacket from the chair and pulled it on, her hands shaking as she fastened the buttons. The biker was already moving toward the door, his boots heavy on the floor. "Come on," he said, looking back at her. "We'll take the back roads. It'll buy us some time." She followed him out into the cool morning air. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the world felt eerily still. The silence of the woods around them was broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the distant hum of the biker's motorcycle. They walked toward the bike, and she climbed on behind him, her heart thumping in her chest. The engine roared to life as the biker twisted the throttle, and they sped off into the unknown. The road ahead shrouded in the thick morning fog. As they left the small house behind, the girl couldn't help but glance back one last time, her eyes searching the empty street. It was strange, the way the world felt so quiet, as though everything was holding its breath. But she knew better. She knew the calm was only temporary. The bike picked up speed, and the girl forced herself to focus on the road ahead. The trees lining the road blurred into a streak of green as the biker guided the motorcycle through the winding path. The girl kept her eyes fixed on the back of his jacket, her grip tightening around his waist. The fear that had settled deep inside her was starting to stir again, the familiar sense of being hunted creeping back. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. The biker's response was simple, but it was enough. Somewhere safe. But the girl wasn't sure if there was such a place anymore. She had been running for so long, and every time she thought she might find safety, it slipped through her fingers. The biker didn't say much as they rode, and the girl didn't push him for more answers. She knew he was trying to keep his focus, trying to stay ahead of whoever was after her. She didn't want to distract him, but her mind was racing, wondering what would happen next. The farther they traveled, the more isolated the roads became. The houses grew sparse, the land open and wild. There was no sign of civilization, just endless fields and dark stretches of forest. The girl could feel the weight of the silence settling over them again. The sense of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the trees, gnawed at her. "We're almost there," the biker said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. The girl's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" she asked, though she had a feeling she already knew the answer. "A cabin," the biker replied. "It's not much, but it's off the grid. No one will find us there." She nodded, though she wasn't sure what to think. A cabin in the woods didn't sound like much of a solution. But at this point, anything that could give them a little more time was better than nothing. They continued down the road, the bike's engine humming steadily as they passed an old sign marking the turnoff. The biker took the turn, guiding the bike onto a narrow, gravel road that twisted through the trees. The air felt cooler here, and the dense forest seemed to close in around them. The girl kept her eyes focused on the path ahead, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew the biker was trying to reassure her, trying to give her hope, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. The cabin was even more isolated than the girl had expected. The trees loomed tall, their thick branches swaying in the wind, as if hiding the small structure from the outside world. The bike slowed to a stop, and the girl felt a small jolt in her chest as they parked in front of the weathered cabin. The place looked abandoned, forgotten by time. The windows were dark, the wooden walls faded and cracked from years of exposure to the elements. It looked like it had been years since anyone had set foot here. The biker dismounted first, his boots crunching on the gravel as he moved around to the front of the cabin. He glanced up at the door, his gaze scanning the area quickly before he nodded to himself. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. The girl slid off the bike and followed him cautiously up to the front steps. The air around them was eerily still, with nothing but the rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. It felt like they had entered a forgotten world, far removed from everything. The biker reached for the door handle, his hand lingering for a moment as he seemed to listen for any sounds inside. He finally turned it, pushing the door open with a creak. The door groaned in protest, but it gave way to a small, dimly lit room. Inside, the smell of dust and mildew hit her immediately, a reminder that this place had been abandoned for a long time. The girl stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. The interior was sparse, just a few pieces of old furniture, a table in the center, and a wood stove in the corner. The floorboards creaked under her feet, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this place had been empty for far too long. "It's not much," the biker said, his voice echoing softly in the quiet room. "But it'll have to do for now." The girl nodded, but the anxiety she had been holding back all day seemed to rise to the surface again. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone outside the window. But the forest beyond remained quiet, still. She tried to push the fear away, but it gnawed at her insides. The biker moved around the room, closing the door behind them and securing it with a heavy latch. He walked over to a small window and peered out, checking for any signs of movement. "We're safe here for the night," he said, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the surroundings. "But tomorrow, we keep moving." The girl didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but she didn't. She was too tired, too emotionally drained. She simply sat down on one of the chairs, folding her arms around herself for warmth. The biker didn't sit. Instead, he went to the back of the cabin and started a small fire in the wood stove. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the room for a few moments. The girl watched the flames dance, the flickering light casting shadows on the walls. She felt like she should say something, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind kept returning to the same thoughts: the chase, the fear, the unknown people hunting her down. Who were they? Why did they want her? The questions burned in her mind, but the answers seemed just out of reach. The silence between them stretched on, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Finally, the biker spoke, his voice quieter now. "You're not alone in this," he said. "I don't know who they are, but I won't let them get to you." The girl looked up at him, the sincerity in his voice cutting through her worry. She could feel the weight of his words, the promise he was making. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about survival. And for the first time in a long while, she believed she might actually have a chance. She nodded slowly, trying to hold on to that small spark of hope. "Thank you," she whispered. The biker gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then returned to tending the fire. The room grew warmer as the flames grew stronger, but the girl couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. The night outside seemed to close in on them, pressing in from all sides. She wanted to feel safe. She wanted to believe that this place, this cabin, was a refuge. But deep down, she knew it wasn't over. She could still hear their footsteps behind her, their presence looming just beyond the trees. The girl closed her eyes, trying to silence the thoughts swirling in her head. But sleep wouldn't come. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind was too alert. She had learned the hard way that when you're being hunted, you can never let your guard down. The fire crackled on, and the girl sat there, waiting for the night to pass, knowing that the journey was far from over. The morning came too quickly, its pale light creeping through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls. The girl awoke to the sound of the wind howling outside, but it wasn't just the wind that kept her awake. The fear, the uncertainty, the nagging feeling that something was wrong, lingered in the air. She sat up, rubbing her eyes as the events of the past few days flooded back. She glanced over at the biker, who was already up and preparing something over the small stove in the corner of the room. The fire from last night had died down to a few embers, and he was quietly stoking it back to life. The girl hesitated for a moment, taking in the scene. He seemed so calm, so focused, and it made her wonder how much of that calm was for her benefit. She knew he was hiding his own fear. She could see it in his eyes, the way he kept scanning the surroundings, always alert, always ready for whatever was coming next. "Morning," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but steady. She nodded, not sure of what to say. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, something she couldn't name. She had learned to rely on him, even though she didn't know him at all. "You need to eat," he added, motioning to the small pot on the stove. "We're leaving soon. We don't have much time." She nodded again, moving over to the stove to join him. She sat down at the small table and stared at the bowl in front of her, trying to force herself to eat. The hunger was there, but so was the heaviness in her chest. She wasn't hungry for food. She was hungry for answers. But no answers were coming. The biker glanced up at her as he packed their few belongings. "We need to stay ahead of them," he said, his voice firm. "I don't know who they are, but they're getting closer. They won't stop until they find you." The girl's throat tightened as the weight of his words sank in. She couldn't stop them. She didn't even know who they were. She looked down at the food in front of her, her mind spinning. She wanted to ask more questions. She wanted to understand. But the answers were out of her reach, like a distant memory she couldn't quite grasp. She shook her head, trying to focus on something else, something more immediate. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker stood up, pulling on his jacket as he moved toward the door. "Now we leave. We don't have a choice." The girl stood up, pushing the food away. She followed him to the door, the chill of the outside air creeping in as he opened it. The forest outside was still quiet, the trees standing tall and silent, but she knew that wouldn't last. The danger was out there, somewhere, lurking in the shadows. They had to keep moving. The girl grabbed her jacket and pulled it tightly around her, trying to block out the cold. She stepped outside, the gravel crunching beneath her boots as she followed the biker toward the motorcycle. He was already strapping his gear on, his eyes scanning the trees as if he expected someone to jump out at any moment. "Stay close," he said again, his tone serious. She nodded, her breath visible in the cold air as she climbed onto the bike behind him. They took off down the winding road, the engine roaring to life as they sped away from the cabin. The forest blurred by in the early morning light, and the girl forced herself to focus on the road ahead. She couldn't afford to think about what might be following them. Every time they stopped, every time they stayed in one place too long, the fear gnawed at her, threatening to take over. The biker didn't say anything, his focus entirely on the road. He was taking them through narrow, hidden paths, roads that were barely more than dirt tracks. She could feel the tension in his body, the way he gripped the handlebars. They were both on edge, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did, and for a brief moment, the girl allowed herself to believe they might be safe. The road stretched on, the trees thick on either side, and the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The girl kept her eyes on the back of the biker's jacket, trying not to look over her shoulder. The weight of the danger still hung over her like a dark cloud, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they caught up. After a few hours of riding, the biker pulled onto a narrow, gravel road that led to a small, run-down gas station. The building was abandoned, its windows cracked, the pumps rusted and covered in weeds. The girl looked around, feeling the familiar sense of unease return. "What's here?" she asked, her voice shaky. The biker didn't answer at first, his gaze shifting around the station, as if assessing the situation. Finally, he nodded. "This is our next stop," he said. "We need to rest for a while and figure out where to go next." The girl hesitated, but she didn't argue. The motorcycle came to a stop, and the biker dismounted, walking toward the back of the building. The girl followed him, her eyes darting to every shadow, every creaking sound. She didn't trust this place, but she didn't have a choice. They needed a plan, and this was as good a place as any to come up with one. They had to figure out how to keep running, how to stay ahead of whoever was hunting her, and for the first time in a long time, the girl allowed herself to hope that they might just make it out of this alive. The abandoned gas station stood silent in the growing dusk, its peeling paint and rusted pumps a stark reminder of forgotten times. The girl's breath formed small clouds in the cool evening air, and she shivered as she stepped off the motorcycle. The biker was already moving toward the back of the building, his every step purposeful, but there was a certain tension in the way he moved. He knew they couldn't stay here long. He was checking the area, scanning for any signs of trouble, but the girl couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She followed him, her footsteps tentative, the sense of unease gnawing at her. The world felt smaller now, as though the very trees around them were closing in. The quiet was deafening, and her thoughts raced, filled with questions and doubts. The biker stopped at the back of the gas station, crouching low to inspect the ground. He looked over his shoulder at her and motioned for her to come closer. "Stay low," he instructed in a whisper, his voice rough but controlled. "We need to move quickly, but we also need to figure out our next step." The girl nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She crouched down beside him, the gravel digging into her knees as she peered out toward the main road. The bike, parked further back out of sight, seemed like a lifeline, but she knew it was also a target. The sound of a distant car engine made her flinch, but the biker didn't react. His eyes were locked on the horizon, reading the movement of the wind and the shifting shadows. They stayed like that for what felt like forever, crouched in the cold, waiting for the next move. "They're close," the biker finally said, his voice tight with urgency. "I can feel it. We have to leave now." Without another word, he stood up quickly and gestured for the girl to follow him. She scrambled to her feet, trying to stay quiet as they made their way toward the back of the building. The gravel crunched under their feet, and the girl felt her chest tighten with each step. She couldn't shake the sense of being followed, the feeling that someone, something, was out there, just beyond the trees, waiting for the right moment to strike. The biker reached the edge of the station's property and stopped, scanning the area once more. The girl waited, her breath shallow and fast, her eyes darting around. The silence felt unnatural, like a trap waiting to snap shut. "Stay close to me," the biker said, his voice low but firm. "Don't make a sound." He took a step forward, then another, moving like a shadow through the dim light. The girl followed closely behind, trying to mimic his movements, trying to breathe quietly. Every step felt like it could be their last, but the biker led her with a calmness that steadied her heart, even if only slightly. As they reached the tree line, the biker signaled for her to stop. He crouched down behind a thick trunk, his eyes scanning the road. The girl crouched beside him, her body shaking from the cold and the adrenaline. The sounds of the distant engine grew louder, closer now. She could feel her pulse in her ears, and her mind raced. Who were these people chasing her? Why was she the target? What had she done to deserve this? The girl squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the thoughts that were crowding in. She had to focus, had to survive. She had to keep moving, no matter what. The biker's hand rested gently on her shoulder, his grip reassuring. "We wait here," he whispered. "Just for a few minutes. They'll pass by, and then we move." The girl nodded, her breath catching in her throat. The distant car engine was now close enough that she could hear it clearly. It was a slow, steady rumble, like the vehicle was purposely crawling along the road. She could hear tires on gravel, the sound of something heavy, something that would be hard to outrun. Her heart raced again, fear surging through her body like a shock. The biker, sensing her anxiety, leaned in closer. "It's okay. Just stay quiet. We've got this." The girl nodded again, but her mind was elsewhere. She was still terrified, still unsure of how this would all end. But the biker's words offered some comfort, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would make it through this. The sound of the car grew louder still, and then, with a sudden screech of tires, it passed. The girl barely dared to breathe as the vehicle moved down the road, disappearing into the distance. She didn't move, not until she was sure it was gone. The biker gave her a signal, and they moved again, slipping out from behind the tree and heading toward the motorcycle. They had to be quick. They had to be smart. The girl's thoughts were a blur as they walked silently toward the bike, her legs still trembling from the tension. They didn't stop to talk. There was no time for that. The biker fired up the engine, and the roar of the motorcycle cut through the silence, filling the air with sound. The girl climbed on behind him, and they took off once again, the road stretching out ahead, full of uncertainty. The farther they went, the more the fear settled in. They were still being hunted. They were still running. And the girl had no idea what would happen next. The sound of the motorcycle engine hummed steadily beneath them as they sped down the winding road. The air was thick with tension, and the girl could feel the weight of the silence pressing in around them. Every mile they traveled seemed to stretch on forever, but there was no relief in sight. The biker was focused, his grip on the handlebars steady as they moved through the twisting, deserted highway. He didn't speak, but she could sense his determination. He was keeping them moving, always alert, always watching. The girl sat tense behind him, her hands clutching his waist, her mind racing with thoughts she could barely control. The darkness around them felt endless. The world seemed to close in as they moved deeper into the unknown, but despite the quiet, she could hear the echo of footsteps in her mind, chasing them. Her eyes flicked nervously over her shoulder, half expecting to see headlights in the distance. But there was nothing, just the dark road, the trees, and the occasional flicker of light from the moon above. She had to trust him. She had to believe that the biker knew what he was doing. But deep down, doubt gnawed at her. Who were they? Why were they after her? What did they want? The biker had promised her they were safe, but safety felt like a distant memory. There was only one thing that mattered now: survival. The next few miles passed in a blur, the landscape shifting from thick forests to more open areas, but the girl still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then, as they rounded another bend, the biker slowed the bike, his gaze locked on something ahead. The girl tensed, instinctively bracing herself for what was coming. He veered off the road onto a small dirt path that she had barely noticed before. The ground was rough, and the bike jolted with each bump, but the biker maneuvered it expertly, his body swaying with the rhythm of the ride. The girl clung to him, unsure of where they were headed but too scared to ask. She could feel the bike slowing as they entered a clearing, the trees opening up to reveal a small cabin, barely visible in the dark. The biker stopped in front of it, the engine sputtering to a quiet stop. He turned to the girl, his face grim. "This is the place," he said, his voice low and calm. She looked at the cabin, her heart sinking. It looked even more secluded than the last place. The windows were dark, and the door sagged on its hinges. It was the kind of place she had been hoping to avoid, isolated, hidden, like a trap waiting to close in. But she didn't have a choice. She had to trust him. They dismounted the bike, and the girl followed the biker toward the door. The cold night air bit at her skin, but the dread that weighed on her heart was far worse than the chill. She could feel every nerve on edge, her senses stretched thin as the biker cautiously approached the door. He tested the handle, then pushed it open with a soft creak. The inside was dark, with only the faintest glimmer of moonlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. The air was stale, and the smell of old wood and dust filled her lungs. The biker stepped inside first, motioning for her to follow. "Stay close," he murmured, his eyes scanning the room before he motioned to the far corner. The girl stepped inside, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. She could feel her pulse quicken as she took in the sparse interior. There was nothing but old furniture, some of it covered with sheets, and a fireplace in the corner. The walls were bare, the place abandoned, as though no one had lived here for years. But the biker was already making his way to the back of the cabin, checking the windows, ensuring everything was locked. The girl followed him, feeling the weight of each step. The fear she had pushed aside for a moment now pressed back on her with full force. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to stay in a place that felt like a forgotten part of the world, surrounded by nothing but trees and shadows. But she had no choice. They were safe for now, and that was all she could hold on to. The biker turned to her, his face hard. "Get some rest. We'll leave at first light." She nodded, too exhausted to protest, but she couldn't bring herself to relax. The cabin felt like it was closing in on her, its walls too close, its silence too thick. The biker moved to the fireplace, setting up a small fire, the flames crackling as they began to warm the room. She could feel the heat from it, but it did little to ease the chill in her bones. Her mind raced, still fixated on the road ahead, the dangers lurking just out of sight. She had to stay vigilant. She couldn't let her guard down. The biker settled down near the fire, his eyes still scanning the room, but he didn't speak. The girl sat on the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. She couldn't stop thinking about what was waiting for them. She didn't know how much longer they could keep running. But for now, they had a temporary reprieve. For now, they were safe. But the girl knew that the worst was still to come. The sun was barely rising, its light filtering through the dense trees surrounding the cabin. The air was crisp, and the sounds of nature filled the space. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the soft morning breeze. It was a peaceful scene, but the girl couldn't shake the tension in her chest. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the faint glow of the fire that still flickered in the corner. The biker had already risen, his silhouette moving in the shadows as he prepared for the next leg of their journey. The girl remained still, her arms wrapped around her knees as she sat by the fire. She had hardly slept, her mind racing with thoughts of the dangers ahead. The biker hadn't told her much, but she knew that they couldn't stay here long. Every minute counted. The time for hiding was over. The world outside was closing in on them, and the girl could feel it. She couldn't ignore the nagging fear that gripped her every time she looked out the small window of the cabin. She stood up slowly, her body still aching from the long hours of being on the road. Her feet were cold on the wooden floor, but the thought of being outside, of moving again, made her feel alive in a way she couldn't describe. The biker was already loading their things onto the motorcycle. He was focused, checking the engine, making sure everything was ready for the road ahead. When he turned and saw her standing by the door, he gave her a small nod, signaling for her to get ready. The girl grabbed her jacket, pulling it tight around her shoulders. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her as she made her way outside. The cool morning air hit her face, and for the first time in days, she felt the stillness of the world around her. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but she didn't let herself relax. They had come this far, but the real danger was still out there. The biker revved the engine, the sound of the motorcycle cutting through the silence like a knife. The girl climbed onto the back, wrapping her arms around him as they set off again. The road ahead was unclear, the trees closing in around them as they sped down the narrow path. Every mile they traveled felt like a step toward safety, but with each mile came a new wave of uncertainty. The girl kept her eyes forward, but she couldn't help but glance behind her every now and then. The fear was a constant companion, reminding her that someone was always out there, always watching. The biker seemed to sense her unease, and after a few minutes, he slowed the bike, taking a sharp turn onto a hidden trail that cut through the forest. The path was rough, the ground uneven, but it was less likely to be seen by anyone chasing them. The girl clung to him, her body tense as the motorcycle bumped over the trail. The trees around them grew denser, and the world seemed to close in further. It felt like they were leaving everything behind, but also running from it. She didn't know how long they could keep this up, how long they could keep running before they were caught. But she couldn't stop now. She wouldn't. The sound of the engine drowned out all other noise, and for a moment, the girl allowed herself to imagine a world where they weren't being hunted. A world where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for someone to find them. But reality quickly shattered that fleeting thought as the biker pulled off the trail and onto a small clearing. The bike came to a stop, and the girl's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to stop. She didn't want to be stationary. The biker glanced at her, his face hard but his eyes soft. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady. The girl swallowed, unsure of what was coming next. She dismounted the bike, her legs shaky as she stood beside him. The tension between them was palpable. She wanted to ask him what their next move was, where they were going, but she already knew the answer. They were always on the move. They always had to be. The biker didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We can't keep running forever," he said, his tone serious. "Eventually, they'll find us. And when they do, we need to be ready." The girl nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words, the gravity of the situation. She knew that this wasn't just about staying ahead of whoever was chasing her. This was about surviving. And to survive, they would need to fight back. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker paused for a moment, his gaze distant. He seemed to be weighing his options, considering their next steps. Finally, he looked at her, his expression hardening. "We don't run anymore. We stand our ground." The girl felt a surge of fear and determination flood her at the same time. They were going to face it. Face whatever was coming for her. It felt like a long time coming, but it also felt like it was too soon. She wasn't ready, but maybe she never would be. "We'll need supplies," the biker continued. "Food, water, anything we can use to defend ourselves. We don't have much time." The girl nodded again, her mind racing as she thought about what they needed. They couldn't keep running forever, and they couldn't stay here. They needed a plan. They needed to make their stand. The world had always felt like it was closing in on her, but now, standing next to the biker, she realized it wasn't just her they were after. It was both of them, and this time, she wasn't running anymore. She was ready to fight back. I have a thrilling tale of survival and danger in the world of Hell Angel stories, where a young girl is relentlessly pursued by unknown enemies, and the only person who can protect her is a mysterious biker. As the girl and the biker embark on a dangerous journey through remote roads and abandoned hideouts, they must stay one step ahead of the forces hunting her down. With every turn, the tension rises, and the stakes become higher. In these Hell Angel stories, the girl finds herself facing a terrifying reality where she must rely on the biker to guide her through a world of danger, betrayal, and unknown enemies. As the story unfolds, the girl's trust in the biker grows, but so does the danger around them. In a world where they can't escape the past, the girl learns that running is no longer an option. They must stand their ground or face certain death. The biker's resolve and the girl's determination set the stage for an epic showdown in these Hell Angel stories, where survival is the only goal, and escape is never guaranteed. Will they make it to safety, or will the shadows of their pursuers finally catch up with them? This is a gripping tale of action and suspense that keeps readers on the edge of their seats. Join the journey in these Hell Angel stories, where the line between life and death is thin, and the fight for survival is everything.